Ladies and gentlemen, I got a new chair before today's show. You can't see it. Well, yeah, you can sort of. Actually, there's a shirt hanging over it. You still can't see it. But we're going to see if this works. It's a very rolly chair, so I might be sliding from side to side during the show. I also appear to be a tiny bit too high in the camera. These are the problems that we work our way through. It's Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball. I'm Dan Vespers. Thanks for tuning in. Today is Miami Heat Day on the show. The Heat is on. A team that went 37-45 last year. They were quite bad. And made kind of one significant roster change. So it's hard to see a colossal difference coming up for this team. But at the same time, it's also sort of good practice to assume that the Heat eventually figure things out. Their FanDuel, that's our title sponsor here on Old Man Squad. Their FanDuel over-under season win total mark is 39.5, and lots of money is, this actually surprises me a little bit, coming in on the under, despite, again, going 37-45, and by all accounts, getting a tiny bit better. Perhaps some of that is because Jimmy Butler was there for half of last year, and this was not a team that finished the NBA campaign particularly strong. But it does kind of feel like this might be one where the general public is a little bit off. And, you know, none of these things are set in stone. But again, kind of looking back towards how did they get to 37 and 45 last year, you can't help but wonder if this is a team that's going to find some sort of different gear. In any event, I lean towards the over on this mark, just based on like guys having more time together and, you know, maybe they get some other guys back. But more than anything, they have a starting five or possibly five with a key sixth man that should be able to win a good number of basketball games, especially in an extraordinarily weak overall, at least as far as depth goes, Eastern Conference. On the fantasy side, we'll start with Bam Adebayo. Bam Adebayo. I could have started with Tyler Herro, but I think his discussion is a little bit more nuanced than Bam's. Adebayo finished last year at number 46 in 9 category leagues and played in 78 out of 82 games. So after sort of the COVID rigmarole, he's gone back to being an extremely durable player again over his last 3 seasons, missing 7, 11, and 4 ball games. That is a lot like earlier in his career when Adebayo prided himself on basically playing every single day. There was really one season. It was that purposefully shortened second COVID year, which was also the Heat coming off the bubble playoff run, and pretty much anybody that made a deep bubble run was super hurt the following season, and Adebayo was kind of no exception to that, although he still only missed 16 games that year. So, you know, this is a guy, and I talked about it a lot at the end of this most recent season. Arguably the thing that I did the most wrong this past year was I took too many risky injury, like games played level chances. And I get it. You can't always know. A guy that's been super durable might have a down year from a health perspective. It might flip, and a guy that's been pretty beat up, like Kawhi Leonard, had a really healthy season, not this year, but the prior one. It happens in both directions. But at the same time, you kind of have to play the numbers a little bit. And that means minimizing risk to the best of your ability. So while Adebayo almost never gets to his mark on a per-game basis, he's coming off a year where he averaged 18 and 10, 2 combined defensive stats, 4 assists. Field goal percent was, frankly, not as good as it should have been. Free throw percent was fine. He does almost always get there by totals. It's worth pointing out that some of the field goal percent dip for Adebayo, because this was his worst field goal percent shooting year of his career, was because he dramatically increased the number of three-pointers he took this past season, up to almost 3 attempts per game after previously never clearing 0.6 of a 3-point percent or of a 3-point attempt in any given ball game. So that's a big one. And it's also a reason why I don't think you can just assume that his field goal percent is going to come back up a whole bunch. His 2-point percent was also down this year. So hopefully that comes back at least a little bit. And that might get his overall field goal percent back up to like 50 instead of 48.5. 2-point percent, most of his career has been somewhere in the 44 or 54, 55, 56 range. This year he was at 52. So maybe that ticks back up as well. Everything else, pretty repeatable for Bam. Again, with no Jimmy Butler around, is there a chance that he does a little bit more on offense? I don't think so. I think we're pretty much at where he's going to be on that front. Steals and blocks are pretty damn consistent year over year for Bam, so I wouldn't expect any large-scale changes there. The rebounding is also pretty damn consistent. This is Bam, but that's fine. Like if you got to spend a third rounder to get him, I think I'm now okay with that because he was number 23 by totals this last year. And for your third rounder, if you can lock in a center who does some of the center stuff, not all of it, and doesn't completely tank your free throw percent, but plays anytime he's really available, that's a pretty good decision to make. I'd love to put him off till the end, but let's do Tyler Herro next. Giggity. This is one where I was way off this past season. There's no way to soft step around it. I didn't think Herro had a big surge season coming, and he did. And you can say that some of it was because Jimmy Butler had kind of checked out. Yeah, that probably played a role in the usage seeing another uptick. His field goal attempts actually didn't change all that much. They went up by a little bit, but the assists went up by 1. So there was just more ball handling. But really, the big change for Herro, and it's one that's hard for us to say is repeatable, is that his 2-point shooting percent, which in his first 5 NBA seasons was 46, 50, 48, 50, 48, this year jumped to 57% on twos. And it feels like he just made more shots. He can drive more. He went to the rim more often this year. You can see that by, free throw. You can look at the shot breakdown. His free throw number actually went up, which was also another key to his increased value because he's a very good foul shooter, and he took 4.2 free throws per game this season after never getting higher than 3.3 at any prior point in his career. He also played a career high in minutes this season. Finally, mostly stayed healthy this season, only missed 5 ball games. So a lot of things went the right way for Tyler Herro. And that's a reason why I'm a little bit nervous on Tyler this coming season. It kind of feels like, and I might get this wrong again, because if he just replicates this year, then that ends up being a win. And he probably isn't a guy who gets drafted in the 3rd round, but who knows? Maybe that's where he goes. I think Herro probably gets drafted in the 4th round this coming season. And based on last year, he could beat that mark. But also, I can't assume that he's going to shoot 57% from 2-point range another year. That's like what big men do. And I get it. Herro's a good basketball player, and he's not a small dude. He's like 6'6", 200. But he's not a big man. He's not playing right in front of the bucket. So, it puts him kind of in his own magical land of shooting guards with an effective field goal percent of almost 57% also. That's just extremely unusual. He's a rarity. And he might turn out to be a consistent rarity, but after 1 year, I don't think I can guarantee it. So with Herro, I wouldn't be at all surprised to see his field goal percent drop from 47 back down to 44-ish, where he was for almost every season of his career up until this point. He had 2 really good 3-point shooting seasons, and not that he's been bad at 3-point field goal percent, but he had a couple of those that were better, and those were his better field goal percent seasons to this point, and those were 44 and 44.5, basically. So the big jump up to 47 which was higher, by the way, for most of the season and then kind of tapered off at the end. That's the one that I don't think we can believe. The other stuff for Herro does, and maybe you see the points tick off just a tiny bit if the field goal percent also ticks off a tiny bit, but the higher assists, that feels very repeatable. Now, again, that one feels more tied to the Jimmy Butler absence. 0.9 steals, that might have just been because he played 35 and change minutes instead of 33. So maybe it is more like 0.9 instead of 0.7, but you might also see that number tick down just a little bit. Rebounds have been incredibly consistent throughout his career so far, so those probably also stick through it. So what does that mean? I think there's a little bit of a fall off for Herro. Not a massive one, but a small one, and enough to where we probably shouldn't take him in the third round. If you can get him in the fourth, that's probably fine. Is this run of good health a one-season thing, or is it something that he can continue to push beyond it? That we also don't really know and can't say for sure. And that's why I would push him down a little bit below where he finished this past season. If you want to see, and well, let's go to the next name on the list, and that next player is going to be. I don't want to go Wiggins or Ware. The W's. We'll go Khalil Ware. So Ware was a summer league standout last year, who did not have a role when the season began, but very much grew into one as the year pushed along. And over the last 2 months, and to me, this is the best way to sort of categorize the Heat. How did these players do over the final 2 months of the season? Basically, post Jimmy Butler trade. Wiggins did miss some time in there, so it's not the world's perfect example, and they hadn't picked up Norman Powell yet. But over that stretch, Khalil Ware started, averaged about 27 minutes per game, 11 and 10 with 2 defensive stats, 58-61 splits, so pretty traditional center mix for what he was doing on the basketball court. And it put him at number 84 in straight 9 category leagues. Obviously, if you're punting free throw, he got a little bit higher. If you're looking at the final 15 games of the year, his mark got a little bit better. Not a massive shift. He averaged about an extra bucket per game over that stretch. So down the stretch, his number of shots per game went up. Everything else stayed pretty much the same. That pushed him up to around top 60 value because, again, anytime, because points was very much a big negative for Ware, and rebounding was already a positive, so you add a little bit more playing time, a little bit more involvement, and his value jumped quickly. But again, he was around number 60 over that range. It's hard to know if the plan is to play him 28 minutes a ball game, but it does feel pretty safe that he's going to play 26 minutes per game, which 26 minutes was around what got him inside the top 100. And I'd feel very comfortable drafting him somewhere inside the top 100. Just scanning, if you want to do it with us, just scanning up and down the Heat roster, Adebayo is really the only other center, at least of the truer sense, that the Heat are even considering playing. They have a rookie out of Michigan named Vlad Golden, who's 7'1", but I don't think they're going to shoehorn him into a bunch of playing time. And then on the roster, the only other player that even is listed with center eligibility is Nikola Jovic, who was very much more of a big wing than a small center on this team last year. So Ware's going to play. How much of those, how much does Bam chew into those minutes? It's obviously going to be some, but like, you can look at the game log here that we're talking about on YouTube. And again, a reminder to please like and subscribe. And if you're listening on Apple or Spotify after the fact, drop that 5-star review. The minutes did bounce around a little bit, but by and large, you could see where it was averaging out was sort of high 20s. Better games, he'd see more minutes. Rougher games, he would not. And that's something that you hope can kind of get smoothed out a bit. Press the Khalil Ware paper and smooth it out in season number 2. Because remember, this dude was a rookie this last year, and he was pushed into a big role, I think bigger than even the Heat anticipated. And now he has a chance to kind of slow the game down a little bit. Into year 2, you hope for some small improvements. I think he probably gets drafted. And again, we're guessing a little bit, but leagues will be open soon. I think he probably gets drafted somewhere in that like 75 to 100 range, and I'd love to try to avoid drafting him at the front end of that. But push him towards the middle to back end, and I think he's a pretty solid pick in there. Let's talk Andrew Wiggins next. He was a mid-season acquisition for the Heat last year, part of the Jimmy Butler trade with the Golden State Warriors. And in his time with the Heat, he was actually pretty good. Kind of a limited sample size, so it's hard to say exactly how that would have shaken out over an entire year. But as we pan down here on YouTube, you can see that in Miami, he got 32 minutes a game, took almost 15 shots, which is the highest number for him since his very beginning, his first of 5 seasons with the Warriors. Man, time flies. I can't believe he'd been with the Warriors for a half decade. Averaged 19 points, 4 boards, 3 assists, 1.2 steals, a block. Good numbers, really good numbers in those 17 ball games with Miami that very much had him inside the top 100 in overall value. The free throw tends to be problematic for Wiggins. That's the thing that always has held him down. He's better at that than he was very early in his career. But, he took almost 5 a game with Miami. And so if he's getting to the line that much, that becomes sort of a more significant negative impact thing on him, which is going to keep him from getting much beyond the edge of the top 100 in non-punt builds. I'm not sure that he's going to get 15 shots a game with a healthy construction of the Miami Heat, and then, of course, also the acquisition of Norman Powell this last offseason. I'm not racing out to draft Andrew Wiggins, but we have seen him in the past go on little runs. And like the beginning of his time in Golden State was one of them, that it was the COVID year where suddenly he kind of added the 3-pointer a little bit, and he went up from 1.2, 1.3 to like 2 to 2.5 threes at a pretty good clip, by the way. He was high 30% at that line. And the rebounds were in the 5s instead of the 4s. And the scoring was up around 20, which is like what he was doing in Miami. So, yeah, I mean, if you're punting free throw, he's a guy that you should be probably targeting in that 100 range. If you're not, I think I'd rather see if he fell another round beyond that. So, 8th round finishes at number 96, 9th round finishes at number 108. I think probably more like a 10th rounder for non-punt builds. But historically, Wiggins has been, and not quite as much this past year. He only played in 60 out of 82 ball games. But historically, when he hasn't been going through the personal stuff, I went through a lot of personal stuff, he's been one of the more durable dudes. So think about him more as a head-to-head guy later in drafts, where you're probably going to get 70-plus games out of him. And yeah, he's going to put some dents into your free throw number, but also with head-to-head, because that's such a high fluctuation stat, as opposed to roto, where it's just going to count up and eventually it's going to do its damage. Head-to-head, you might have some good weeks and some bad weeks. And on the bad weeks, you might have some of your other guys have really good weeks. And so that doesn't match up as perfectly. I think Wiggins makes a lot more sense as a late head-to-head grab than a late roto grab. A sip of water and off to Norm we go. And this is the big one for whether you think the Heat are going to go over that 39.5 season win total mark that we mentioned from our buddies over at FanDuel at the beginning of the show. Thank you, as always, to FanDuel. Oh, their logo is up in the top right, but you can't see it right now. There it is. There's that logo, for being a part of what we're doing here at the Believe Network, and, of course, what we're doing on Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball. I'm trying to shift my chair around, and it's like going to roll me right off the side of the screen. I got to, it's fair to say, but we have a terrier that tried to jump through my backdrop earlier this morning. She's old. She's blind. That's why she tried to jump through my backdrop. I need her hairs to start getting caught in the wheels of this chair, because this sucker is rolling around, you freshly oiled up new office chair. I'm just gliding straight across my room. Whee! Anyway, thank you to our buddies at FanDuel, as always, who once again have the Miami Heat regular season win total number at 39.5. And if you think the Heat can do it, which I actually do, because, again, they were at 37 last year. And despite, they did that with fairly good health, but the Jimmy Butler stuff was such a drag on them. They played pretty well initially when he started pouting, and they're like, we can do it without him. It's the classic injured star theory kind of thing. Other players try to pick it up to show that we don't need him anyway. And then reality set in. But now they've got Norm, which was very much something they didn't have last season. And that is one other consistent scoring threat. And is this what the Heat needed? No, probably not. I think the argument for what the Heat needed was probably a true superstar level player, which they had in Butler, and they don't anymore. As good as you think Tyler Herro is, he doesn't move the needle quite the way that someone like Jimmy did. But Norman Powell has a long run, a solid 6-7 year run now of extraordinarily efficient basketball. Is he going to pile up assists? No. Is he going to pile up rebounds? Absolutely not. But is he going to score at a great three-point shooting clip with a good free throw mark and a good field goal percent? Yeah, he is. But is he going to do it more like this past season with the Clippers, where he was the number 2 option for half the season? Or is he going to be more like what he was before that, where... Yeah, my little kid came barging in, and I completely lost my train of thought. We were talking about Norman Powell. How much does he change the fortunes of this team? Do we think Norm is worth 3 wins, basically? And the answer to that is probably no. But time, I believe, is worth more than that. So again, we were kind of talking about how Norm fit in with the win total, and also how much he's going to actually get to do this year. If you're thinking how much is Norm going to get to do, you're probably looking more at right when he first got traded to the Clippers, which is more like 10, 11, 12 shots per game. He was, as always, terrifically efficient in that role, but 15, 16 points per game, 3 boards, 2 assists, and high 20s in minutes. That's not really enough for Norm to put up fantasy value. And the way we know that is that's kind of what he did after Kawhi Leonard got back this year, where he was taking 13 shots a game after Kawhi returned, and he was ranked near the edge of the top 200. And you can go back through the years of what did Norman Powell do when he was given around 10, 11, 12 shots a game. 10 shots per game, he was number 170 with the Clippers the year before this last one. Go back another season, 12 shots per game. He was number 150 that year. I like Norman Powell a lot. He was a really nice grab in flyer territory this last season on the assumption that he was going to get to do more with no Paul George, and then also for a long stretch without Kawhi Leonard. But there just isn't a path for him in Miami to be more than, at best, a third option behind Bam Adebayo and Tyler Herro, but also kind of battling to be that third option with Andrew Wiggins, which is a worse scenario than what he was dealing with the Clippers. Now, look, I'll give you that the Clippers' top guy, who would be Kawhi once he got himself right, was going to have higher usage than probably anybody on the Heat. Once Kawhi was kind of himself, he was taking 19 shots a game, and, nobody really on Miami was going quite that high consistently. Tyler Herro was pretty close to it. But James Harden was more of a pick and roll guy, so he did a lot of passing to someone like a Norman Powell, and the Heat don't even really have a guy like that. Their point guard is Davion Mitchell, who, by the way, was pretty good down the stretch this last year, but I think he also kind of gets squeezed out by the Heat just being healthy. Even if he starts, he kind of gets squeezed out a little bit. By the way, keep one eye on Davion Mitchell to see if he's the 5th starter and if Norm is coming off the bench, because if that's the case, you could at least look at him as kind of like a steals assists guy. I think more of a streamer type on Davion, but he was pretty good down the stretch. Final month, he was top 75, but he was playing 32 minutes a game, and he was getting to do a lot of stuff, and Wiggins was out for a big chunk of that, and Jovic was out for a big chunk of that, and they didn't have Norman Powell, and blah, 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 blah. Point is, we're not talking about Davion Mitchell on today's show, but just a quick hitter on him. I don't think you need to draft him. I think you can probably pick him up, but if you did draft him, he should be a last round kind of dude, especially unless we find out that he's about to start and play an absolute boatload of minutes. But they just have, like, there's too much depth on this team. As far as Norm goes, I'm even less likely to draft him than Davion Mitchell because I don't think there's enough playing time. I don't think there are more than a dozen shots for Norm, and he needs more like 15, 16 shots to really be a legitimate, consistent fantasy threat. And so, to recap on the Miami Heat, Bam Adebayo, very safe third rounder. Tyler Herro, pretty safe fourth rounder. Not as safe third rounder if you think that 2-point field goal percent comes back down a little bit. Khalil Ware, a solid target, I think, in that 80 to 95 range. We'll see where he actually ends up going. Andrew Wiggins, more of a head-to-head late grab for the likely durability, but yes, free throw percent issues. Norman Powell, probably not draftable. And Davion Mitchell, probably more like a last round low upside flyer, but one that should at least be semi on your radar. Like, rate, subscribe on the way out. You guys know the drill at this point. There we go. Now I lowered my chair. Took me 26 minutes to figure it out, but now I'm at the right height for the YouTube video. With his new office seat, I'm Dan Vespers here on Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll be back with you tomorrow on Thursday, my kids' first day of school for this coming year, where I hopefully will have a few more minutes to myself. Adios, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow.